Okay, so for today, we're going to be looking at multiplication. We're going to be multiplying radicals. What I'm going to do, we know something that we call distributive property. So let me refresh your mind. Let me go with something blue here. What if I had something like 5, and then inside parentheses, I had something like 2x plus 3? Remember, back in the days when we saw this, we will go 5, the number on the outside, to the terms on the inside. So 5 times 2x will give us 10x, and then 5 times 3 will give us 15. Remember, we call that distributive property. Same thing is going to happen here. Same thing. It's just that now you see a parenthesis here on this side, but on the left side, you see two terms, not just one term. So what I'm going to do first, I'm going to grab the first term. So negative 2 radical 3. I'm going to multiply this with the first term and then with the second term. So I'm going to do distributive property of the first term to begin with. Now, one thing I got to remember, whole numbers multiply with whole numbers, radicals multiply with radicals. So the first thing I'm looking at is negative 2 radical 3 multiplied by radical 3. When it comes to whole numbers, it's only a negative 2. When it comes to radicals, I get radical 9. Notice how whole numbers multiply with whole numbers, radicals multiply with radicals. 3 times 3 is 9, so that's how I got negative 2 radical 9. Okay, so now I'm looking at the first term, so negative 2 radical 3 times a negative 5. I know whole numbers multiply with whole numbers, so negative 2 times negative 5, that's positive 10. And then radicals, I have radical 3. Whole numbers multiply with whole numbers, radicals multiply with radicals. Okay, so I distribute that term already. Okay, so now I'm going to distribute this negative 1. So negative 1 times negative 1 times radical 3 will give me negative 1 radical 3. Whole numbers multiply with whole numbers, radicals with radicals. Do not mix them. And then I'm going to multiply negative 1 times negative 5. So that's going to give me positive 5. So notice how I first grabbed the first term and I distribute it to both of those. And then I look at the second term, so the negative 1, and I distribute it over here. Okay, now let me simplify what I can. I know the square root of 9 is 3, so that becomes a whole number. And I said whole numbers multiply with whole numbers, radicals with radicals, do not mix them. So looking at my first term, negative 2 times 3, that gives me negative 6. My second term, nothing I can do. I'm just simplifying. Radical 3 is as simple as it can be. My third term, nothing I can do. So minus 1 radical 3. And then at the end, I have a plus 5. So let me combine my like terms. I'm going to start first with those terms that don't have a radical. That's the smallest radical we have. So negative 6 and a positive 5 give me a negative 1. So I combine those terms. And then the terms in the center, I see 10 radical 3 minus 1 radical 3. I know 10 minus 1 is 9. So this is plus 9 radical 3. On paper, this is it. I'm done. For our homework, I'm going to write this as negative 1 plus 9 RAD for radical, open and close parentheses, and inside a 3. So negative 1 plus 9 radical 3. Okay, let's take a look at question number 30. On my parentheses on the left, the first term is 1. So I'm going to multiply 1 times 3. So that's going to give me 3. and then 1 times a negative 3 radical 2. So I'm going to multiply my whole numbers first. 1 times a negative 3 is a negative 3. Multiply my radicals, so I get radical 2. Now I'm looking at the second term of the first parentheses with the sign included, right? I'm looking at this as a positive 4 radical 2. I'm going to multiply that times 3. So whole numbers. 4 times 3 is 12. So plus 12 radical 2. And then I have to multiply that here. Whole numbers, 4 times a negative 3 is a negative 12. My radicals, multiply them. 2 times 2 is 4. So I call that radical 4. Okay, now let me simplify what I can. My first term is just a 3. Nothing I can do. My second term, minus 3 radical 2 plus 12 radical 2. Nothing I can do. Now here, the square root of 4 is 2. So negative 12 times 2 gives me a negative 24. Now to finish this, combine like terms. So let me take a look at those terms that don't have a letter or don't have a radical. So 3 minus 24. That happens to be negative 21. And then those that do have a radical, I see negative 3 radical 2 plus 12 radical 2, same radical, so I'm just combining the numbers on the front. A negative 3 and a positive 12 give me a positive 9. So plus 9 radical 2. On paper, that will be it. Negative 21 plus 9 radical 2. For our homework, I'm going to type it as negative 21 plus 9 RAD for radicals, open and close parentheses, and a 2 inside. Again, all together, no spaces. Now let's take a look at number 31. Let me multiply my first term with the first term of the second parentheses. 3 times a negative 3 is negative 9. 3 times a radical 5, that gives me positive 3 radical 5. Remember, whole numbers multiply with whole numbers, radicals with radicals. Do not mix them. So notice how I just put the 3 in the radical 5. I cannot mix them. Then I'm going to multiply 4 radical 5 times a negative 3. Whole numbers, 4 times 3 is 12. So 4 times a negative 3 is negative 12 radical 5. Now multiplied here, I'm going to get 4 radical 25. Right, the radicals are multiplied. 5 times 5 is 25. So let me simplify my terms if I can. My first term is a negative 9. Nothing I can do. The second term, my radical 5, nothing I can do. So let me just copy this. Plus 3 radical 5. Then the second term, radical 5, nothing I can do. So minus 12 radical 5. Now here, the square root of 25 is 5. So that becomes a whole number. And I know 4 times 5 is 20. So let me write that plus 20. To finish this, let me combine those that don't have a radical first. A negative 9 with a positive 20, that's 11. On the radicals, I see these two have the same radical, radical 5. Positive 3 and a negative 12 is negative 9. So let me call that negative 9 radical 5. The way I see it really was like there was a match. The positive scored 3 points and the negative scored 12 points. So that means a negative is 1 by 9. Again, on paper, this is how we do it. On our homework, we type it as 11 minus 9. Minus 9. RAD for radical, open and close parentheses. And inside the parentheses, we get a 5. Lastly, let's take a look at number 32. This little squared, this little exponent, what it means is that I have the same parentheses twice. So in reality, I have, let me write this in black. In reality, I have 1 plus radical 2 times 1 plus radical 2. That little exponent meant I have the same parentheses. Notice how it's outside of the parentheses. Have the same parentheses twice. So let me multiply it. 1 times 1 is 1. 1 times radical 2 is plus 1 radical 2. Then let me distribute the radical 2 times 1 gives me 1 radical 2. And then lastly, radical 2 times radical 2, that's radical 4. Let me simplify what I can. Nothing I can do here. Plus 1 radical 2, nothing I can do here. Plus 1 radical 2, nothing I can do here. Now the square root of 4 is 2. So I'm going to call that plus 2. Became a whole number because it's a perfect square. Now to finish this, let me combine my whole numbers. 1 plus 2 is 3. Let me combine those radicals. They must have the same radical, which is good. And then I'm just looking at 1 plus 1. And the 1 plus 1 is 2. So I'm going to call this plus 2 radical 2. And the way I'm going to type this will be 3 plus 2 radical 2. There you go. That's what we did today.